Our speaker is John Rush. He's the CEO with Clean Turn Enterprises. I'm going to let him tell you a little bit about his background, but I'm thinking that we're going to get a lot from his presentation.
Good afternoon. All right.
There we go.
I got the perfect hour right after lunch, which is always amazing. So, and about 40 minutes from here, my allergies started kicking up, so I took a little bit of a Benadryl. So I'm actually glad to be out of the car. Started dozing off there in the last 5 minutes, but was excited to be here. Just came up from Columbus. Again, my name is John Rush, and I am part of an organization called Clean Turn Enterprises. We are a social enterprise incubator in Columbus, Ohio. We launched in 2012. A group of philanthropic, and I'll just give you a little bit of backstory on what Clean Turn is, what we do, how we got there. I'll integrate a little bit of my story and the journey of leveraging business to impact society in a positive way, specifically with respect to hiring individuals who've had some challenging backgrounds. And so a group of philanthropic investors said, hey, Rush, we love what you're doing in Chicago, and we'd love if you'd come to Columbus and help us get something up and running in Columbus. And so my wife being from Columbus and having family near Columbus, you know, the U-Haul was packed and we were ready to move. And so Deb and I and our 8 kiddos moved up to Columbus in 2012. Yep, you heard that right, 8 kiddos. My first social enterprise was a baby manufacturing plant. So they just kept popping out one after the other. So first 5 were boys, and then we mixed it up a little bit and had 2 girls, and then number 8 was a boy. So yeah, that was a common question, right? So there was a lot of common questions that we got that we enjoyed, and so the first we actually crammed 8 in 10 years. So it's kind of crazy to think about it, actually. So yeah, right. So for about 5 years after that, as I was in baby withdrawal, I would joke occasionally about number 9 being on the way, but after about the 15th black eye and busted nose, I thought I probably should stop joking like that around Mrs. Rush. So, but we moved to Columbus, again, a group of fellas who had some disposable income. They thought, well, if we could invest in a social enterprise model that wouldn't be dependent on ongoing philanthropy and grants, but could take that initial investment and generate something that was self-sustaining, that would be pretty neat. And so they took some of their disposable income. There were 8 of us that owned Clean Turn. We incorporated as an LLC, so as a traditional LLC business. We built into the operating agreement language specific to our social mission. And again, the vision was to see that initial investment, i.e. gift, become a gift that gave in perpetuity. We also included in the operating agreement that we would cover any tax liability of those that invested. About 3 years after that initial round of investment, I bought 4 of the investors out, and so one of the individuals that invested $100,000 walked away with about $150,000 after 3 years, and also the great feeling of having done something great with his money and able to take that money that he made and invest it in other social ventures, which was, again, the bigger picture vision from a business standpoint. Over the last 6 years, we've employed a little over 650 individuals. Roughly 40% of the folks that we've hired have used us as a stepping stone to move on to other opportunities in the marketplace, or they're still with us in management or supervisory roles. We have about 100 full-time staff amongst our different business lines that we've launched. Initially, we incubated 6 business lines with the vision of launching separate brands along the way, and one of those brands is She Has a Name Cleaning Services. It's a residential commercial cleaning company that hires individuals coming out of domestic violence, addiction, and human trafficking. Another business line is Clean Turn Demolition Services. We primarily work with about 200 contractors in Central Ohio, providing interior demolition services, and it's a pathway for individuals coming out of prison to enter into the trades. Passion, Purpose, Profit is a annual event that we do, but it's also a way for us to consult other businesses on how to create hiring policies that are conducive to hiring folks who've had challenging backgrounds, A, and then B, how do you create the right culture in your business so that individuals are not just hired, but that they also can thrive and move forward in a promising career. And then in December of last year, we launched Third Way Cafe, and it's more of a pilot project. I love coffee, I love books, and I love people, and so it's those three things in a nice little coffee shop over in the Hilltop community on the west side. We work with a lot of local brewers. We work with Coffee Crafters, and Coffee Crafters manages 6 different coffee shops in 4 different prisons across the state, training inmates on how to be baristas. So the idea is when they return back to the community, they can work at Third Way Cafe, and then because of our network with all the local roasters, as they have job openings, they can slide over into an opportunity with one of those roasters, or over the next year, we opened our first kiosk. As they go through business planning 101, they can learn the ins and outs of what it would look like to not only be a barista, but also what it would look like to own and operate their own kiosk that could be placed geographically either at the airport or at Cover My Meds, a big company in Columbus, or other places, and they could become owner-operators of their own brand and their own coffee kiosk. That's kind of the bigger picture vision there. So, and we really like to think of Third Way Cafe as a way to educate the community. We strategically placed it in a community that is in the process of developing with the idea that we want to see gentrification not happen in a negative way. We want to see development happen in a positive way. And so some folks use the terminology gentrification with justice rather than injustice. And so if we can educate the broader community on how to be the right place for folks who are returning from challenging backgrounds, or for folks that are coming out of generational poverty, or for folks that are on a fixed income, rather than seeing folks displaced, how do we create a community in which individuals can thrive and move forward? And so that's kind of the approach of Third Way Cafe. It's more community-centric, whereas the other business lines are more individual-centric, focused on the individual and developing the individual professionally and personally. Again, I mentioned we incorporated as an LLC, and so from day one, we've operated with zero dependence on grants and ongoing philanthropy. We have leveraged opportunities with a couple of foundations to access what are called PRIs, program-related investments, but those are loans, and they do have to be paid back, but they're pretty generous loans. The ones we've gotten, at least, one of them was a 5% loan, deferred principal for 6 months. It was a small loan by the Tony Wells Foundation. A second loan was by the Columbus Foundation. It was a $200,000 loan at 2% interest, deferred principal for a year, 10-year term loan. So it's pretty much, for anybody that's an entrepreneur looking for capital, it's like, woo, yeah, I like that. No grant requirement documents that we had to fill out. It was literally money that we could leverage to take advantage of opportunities in the marketplace that from a cash flow standpoint, we would not have otherwise been able to take advantage of to create the opportunities that we were able to create in such short order. And so, yeah, that's a little bit of background. We have been very limited in the number of opportunities that we can create for individuals that have certain more challenging backgrounds. And I know the theme and the topic and the discussion here at this particular conference is around how do we address successful reentry for individuals that the general society labels as sex offenders and understands as sex offenders. And so, and of course, our language that we use in the reentry space collectively is always evolving. It's been evolving for me over the last 20 years. And I had mentioned that this work for me started in Chicago. It started in '97 after I left the Marine Corps and volunteered at a homeless shelter and I knew what Appalachia poverty was because I grew up in a little trailer park in West Virginia. My mom had struggled with addiction, and so it was just Dad and I. Growing up, I left in 6th grade because I was in a situation where there was an older gentleman that was my sex education teacher, and so my view of sex was extremely twisted because of that education. It was a manipulative situation where I was molested, and I wanted to get out of that situation. As much as I loved my dad, he had no idea. And so I ended up moving to my mother's up in Cleveland, and at that point she was about 8 years, or maybe 10 years clean, and so I knew what it meant to be in somewhat of a challenging background, but I did not know what it was like to live in K-Town, Chicago, and to be recruited at a young age by the vice lords. And so I interjected myself right into the mix with my wife, and at the time we had 1 kid, and she was pregnant with number 2. We intentionally lived in K-Town on the west side of Chicago. We made up the 0.00001% Caucasian folks in the neighborhood, and I used to hang out in the alleys. I was a decent basketball player, kind of like Stephen Curry. No, just kidding. Sorry. But maybe more like, anyways, we'll get off that topic. I know it's kind of Steve Kerr maybe, but yeah, so I used to hang out in the alleys and get to know folks, and volunteered at a shelter, and just really fell in love with the city of Chicago and the west side in particular. And I remember one of the first ventures that we tried to launch was a painting company. I had no idea how to paint. Matter of fact, just an interest of full disclosure, I really don't know how to do anything from a skill standpoint. My dad was a mechanic, and he could fix anything in the world. And I remember as a little boy at the shop, I'd answer the phone, I'd clean the shop, and I'd take stuff apart, but I could never get anything back together again. And so, but Dad could fix anything. And so we started this painting company, and I remember this is right when I had a little flip phone thingy, and I was in grad school, and I remember getting this text, and we were painting this house in Naperville. And anybody familiar with the Chicago area? How many you're familiar with Naperville? Naperville is a little different in terms of the type of housing, right? I mean, it's a pretty plush area, right? And yeah. So the dog ran through the poodle the poodle ran through the paint tray was the text, and so that was really the breaking point for the painting company. I was done. It was a house in Naperville. The poodle got out. The poodle ran through the paint tray, and so we had little poodle prints all throughout the house. It wasn't part of the scope of work, unfortunately. So, and so I learned quickly that just because individuals, and there was more. That was literally the breaking point. There was a lot of other challenges prior to that. And just because somebody says they know how to do something, it doesn't mean they necessarily do know how to do something. And so, but the heart was there to figure out how we could, because I couldn't find folks that would be willing to hire the individuals that I was becoming friends with. And so I'm thinking, there's got to be a way to figure out how to launch our own company and to start our own business, and we can decide who we want to hire and who we want to fire. Let's just, forget trying to find folks that'll be employment partners, and let's just be that employment partner. And then I had the good fortune to partner up with the CARA program. That's amazing. And the CARA program, boy, they took us all the way. The CARA program was actually a neat experience because Goldman Sachs was one of their partners, and that big behemoth, evil monster, investment firm. It's not really. Well, it depends. Anyways, we won't get on that. But one of their managing directors was on the board, and they provided some startup capital to help us get a small business up and running called Clean Slate in Chicago. And I had the opportunity to make that happen, and work with a fellow named Mark Carroll and the staff at the CARA program. And we focused on creating a transitional job model where individuals would go through 7 weeks of soft skills training, at the CARA program. And then after that 7 weeks of soft skills training, individuals that were classified as high obstacle to employment would transition into a transitional job at clean slate. And the average time of the transitional job, it wasn't a set time, but the average time was 4 to 6 months in that transitional job experience before individuals were placed in the private sector with one of about, at the time, 70 companies that agreed to be employment partners to our transitional job program. And so each year, by the time about year 3 rolled around, we were averaging about 500 individuals that would go through the soft skills training. Roughly half of the individuals that went through the life skills training, 50% were classed as high obstacle. The others were classified as moderate obstacle. And those that were high obstacle, again, about 250 would come over to clean slate for a transitional job. And on average, 160 to 170 of those 250 would be placed within 4 to 6 months after the transitional job experience into the private sector. And then our annual retention rates with those folks that were placed were between 76 and 80%. And it's still maintained those numbers over the last decade of where folks are at a year after placement. And oftentimes individuals will hear the number 76, 80% retention rate, and they're like, wow, that's amazing. And it is amazing. But the process began way back at admissions, and we set it up just like a community college in terms of the language that we used. We didn't use caseworker and client. You know, it was student, teacher. It was set up like, from a language standpoint, like a college. And so our admissions team that worked on recruitment for students and eventually interns at Clean Slate that were in a transitional job before getting placed, you know, we would screen roughly 1,500 people a year. And so 1,500 people a year, 76% of about 150 people placed, that comes out to about 10% of that initial population of folks that we were screening on the very front end. And so the retention was great, but the process was long, and the unanswered question is, what about the other 90%? And that was always an ongoing question and point of debate and frustration and discussion and research and so on and so forth. So we're still learning. I think, you know, Clean Turn, we're still learning as well. At Clean Turn, we have been able to create opportunities. As a matter of fact, we did a luncheon about a year ago, actually, or so, in Columbus, and one of the individuals that came to the luncheon, John, I was actually hoping he could come with me today. He's one of our estimators, was in a situation where he became a registered sex offender, and he was working on his graduate program at OSU in engineering, and was in a very successful career, but found himself in a situation where his addiction to pornography led to pornography that was underage pornography, and so after being married for 6 months, the FBI was at his house, and his wife was wondering why, and then he showed up home, and it was a lot of drama and a big story. Well, him and his wife were at this luncheon, and I heard a little bit of their story, and then I said, let's go up to the office after the luncheon, and let's chat. And then a week later, we chatted again. And then a week later, we didn't have a position, but we created a position. And he accepted it, and he's been with us now for just over a year, and has done exceptionally well as an estimator for our Clean Turn demolition business line. And Frank is another individual on our staff who is our facilities manager. We initially hired Frank, and typically individuals that are registered sex offenders, were very limited in the opportunities we can create, not so much because of where we're at, but because of where our customers are at. And so, for example, in the trades, you know, anytime we do a project, for example, at OSU, it's almost impossible for us to be able to find projects at OSU because of the restrictions that exist for contractors based on backgrounds. But then there's other places in the marketplace where we have zero barriers, and so we're constantly looking for those projects, and that's why it's great to have somebody like a John, who's one of our estimators, developing relationships with about 200 contractors in Central Ohio, finding those opportunities. And then we're just selective about what projects we put individuals where based on background. So you have to be creative and innovative. You have to understand the market. You have to understand managing perceptions. The bigger the brand, for example, an OSU brand, we understand the more risk they have to manage than smaller companies and smaller organizations, perhaps. And so wrestling through those dynamics as a partner, as a business partner with the business community, is one of the secrets in developing a social enterprise that can be successful at not only doing great work, but also creating opportunities for employment for individuals who've had challenging backgrounds. But you have to be clever, and you have to be crafty, and you have to be innovative, and you have to understand that while there's a lot of no's, there are some yeses, and be patient with that and develop that over time. Frank is an individual that we hired initially. Again, I don't know necessarily if we had a spot for Frank, but we kind of wanted to create a spot. Frank's story is fascinating. He spent 26 years incarcerated for, based on all the evidence and working with organizations that work with folks to try to make the case for their innocence based on the feedback from those organizations. It seems clear to us that it was for a crime that he never committed, but it was a crime that led to him being a registered sex offender. And for 26 years, he was serving life, so he had to go up before the parole board on a regular basis, and they granted him an opportunity after 26 years. And about 2 weeks after his release, he came to our office, and we hired him, not knowing exactly what we were going to do. And he jumped in, hook, line, and sinker, hitting home runs every day with a positive, productive attitude. And over the last almost 2 years now, he's in a position where he's our facilities manager. And I also let folks know he's my bodyguard. So, just a stellar individual who loves our mission and loves the business that we're in. And he takes care of our facility and our vehicles, which is no easy task. And he also is an advocate in the community for others who have had challenging backgrounds themselves. And I remember him telling the story when he first went to Burger King after he got out. You know, this is after coming back to his home that was where he grew up, which was boarded up in an area that was completely, it looked as if a bomb had dropped on it because of the impact of 2008. And so that's not the community he remembered when he went in 26 years ago. He went to Burger King, and he went to get, after he got his order, he got an empty cup, which he was the first experience he had of getting an empty cup, because he ordered a drink. He expected a cup that had a drink in it. And then they pointed him to the machine, and then he walks over to the machine, and he's looking at this machine that's just a flat screen machine, and with the thing under it, and he's just looking at it, and he's embarrassed to ask for help, but realizes that I need to ask for help, and he did. And he tells that story to a lot of our newer staff too that come through the doors. You cannot be afraid to ask for help. You're just going to have to learn how to ask for help. And so he did. He asked for help, and the guy showed him how to use the buttons. It's hard enough, and if even still sometimes, especially when you're pushing, you're like, I know I'm pushing this thing. What? This thing's not switching fast enough. They're banging on the thing. You ever done that? It seems most of the time it happens on water too. It's like I want water. It's water. But so it's been great to see how we can leverage business to impact our community in a positive way. So that's a little bit of framework and story where we're from and what we're about. I do want to leave room for questions, and I'm trusting that somebody else is keeping track of time and will tell me when we're done. So just let me know when it's time for me to shut up. So I want to open the floor up to questions that you might have as it relates specifically to How do you leverage business as a means to create opportunity, employment for folks who've had challenging backgrounds? Anybody in here own a business? Great. How many of you have within your business, you've hired individuals who are registered sex offenders? Yeah. So you guys have had that experience. What type of business are you in?
Educational software.
Educational software? Skincare? Yeah. Real estate investment. Now, skincare business, you guys manufacture? So you have a building where you manufacture, make the product? Yeah. And the folks you hire work in that facility. Yeah, I've often, I think manufacturing is one of the best, I think, businesses that could be leveraged for hiring individuals who are registered sex offenders, primarily because you're in an isolated location. You don't have to worry about your customer base being concerned about who's on their property, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I saw another hand over here.
I haven't hired anybody with that.
No? What type of company do you have?
I have an environmental consulting.
Environmental consulting. Great. Somebody else raised their hand over here. Oh, yes, sir.
I haven't hired anybody yet, but I hope to in the future. But narrow path recovery, it's an LLC also.
Okay, great. Did I see another hand? Yes, sir. Telemarketing. Yeah, it's another one. It's. Do they work from their home or do they work from a call center? From their home, yeah. You know, home-based businesses or businesses that are in a facility where you can provide the support, the culture, the environment for folks that are coming out of challenging backgrounds is so important, I think. The other thing is the entrepreneurship training. We do a lot of entrepreneurship training in the prisons themselves and in partnership with the Finance Fund, where we come alongside folks and talk about how do you create, first of all, what is an entrepreneur? And second of all, how do you build a business plan? Because for some folks, that might be the route to go, rather than looking at plugging in and working for someone else, strategically thinking about what product or service could I provide in the marketplace. And of course, it's still a question of being realistic about your background and what opportunities you'll be able to legitimately get. Whether it's fair or unfair, that's a separate discussion. You have to deal with reality and work on this separate conversation as you develop your brand and your business model. One of the best business models in the country, Dave's Killer Bread. Anybody heard of Dave's Killer Bread? Anybody eat Dave's Killer Bread? Yeah, good, yeah. We don't very often, just because it is a little bit more pricey, but anyways, but it serves a good mission, right? And so you have a story here where an individual, one of the co-owners, spent some time incarcerated, and they've built a company that tells a story of you can't judge a person by their past. You shouldn't forever define a person by decisions that they've made in the past, et cetera, right? And so they've developed a platform that allows them to be able to speak into this other discussion. And so if you're a returning citizen and you're looking at opportunities in the marketplace, thinking you want to become an entrepreneur and start your own business, let's say you wanted to get into the property services business and you wanted to partner with banks to manage REO properties. Well, the reality is, even if you start an LLC, when you reach out to them and they give you their contract, there's going to be a paragraph in there that makes it very clear that you are not going to be a vendor for them. Now, fair or unfair, the rules may or may not need to change. That's not, at this particular point in time, you can't spend 6 months trying to debate reality. So you have to think about what area of the market can I provide a product or service to where there's an easier entry point for me based on where I'm at in life. And it's frankly not any different for anyone else. I mean, there are certain types of businesses that different people are more equipped based on background, training, personality, etc. Everybody that's an aspiring entrepreneur needs to wrestle through that exercise. It's just that folks that are coming out of incarceration or other challenging backgrounds have maybe a few more things that they need to think about as they reintegrate back in. And having a coach, having a different network of connections to help them in that process is sometimes the best thing that can be done. Because any successful entrepreneur will be quick to tell you that the reason why they've had success is A, yes, they've worked really, really, really hard, but B, they've also had a network of friends, family, people that they've leaned on, people they've sought advice from, et cetera, that have helped shepherd them along the way. And so that's just as important for folks that are coming out of challenging backgrounds who, for the most part, most often, a lot of times, don't necessarily have that. Or if they have had that or had it at one point in time, they may have lost a good portion of it because of the challenging situation that they find themselves in now. Or they may be so embarrassed by the situation that they are coming out of that they're afraid to open up and ask for help. So all their confidence has just dwindled away, and then we need to rebuild that confidence to be able to be bold, ambitious, and start seeking that advice once again. Yes, sir?
I want to back up what you just said before. My wife and I bought the business that we had. We spent about 2 years looking for another. All right. Yep. Are you going to hold it? Before we bought the business that we have now, the organic skincare business, we spent about 2 years looking for a franchise to buy. The most instrumental part of that is what I want to reiterate that you just said. Is I had a coach me through it. And when I started the process, he talked to me and my background, and he loved every piece of it. But at the very end of that interview, I had to say, there's one more thing you need to know. He listened, and he just said, look, that's going to make it a lot more challenging. The good part of this story is that he said, I might be able to find you 1 or 2 franchises. Turned out he found about 12. And I'd say 8 to 10 of those 12 all had a story of their own. So it became like the CEO. He took the message up the flagpole. And he always came back and said, you know something, the CEO of this company just so happens to have a brother, or he himself or she herself has an issue. So they all understood once I told them this is the deal, the doors were not shut to everything. So having that coach really smoothed the way.
Yeah, that's great. Yep, and the more folks like that we can connect people to, I think the more hope it inspires. Because it's like, hey, this person did it. Wait, and this person did it, and that person's gone through this, and like, well, if they can do it, then why can't I, right? And so, and how did they do it? Well, let me follow some of the same things that they did in terms of developing a new network. Yes, ma'am.
If somebody's been incarcerated for a long time, over 20 years, and they come out with the idea that they might want to do an entrepreneurial kind of experience, would you recommend that they just get another job? I mean, it's been a long time.
Yeah, that's a great question. 20 years
to try to figure out how life works and how business works, or should they just pop into the library and start working at it?
Yeah, that's a great question. The question is, somebody that's been in 20 years, should they jump straight into trying to start a company, or should they get a job? And frankly, 50% of my entrepreneurship training that I do in the prisons is life skills training and discouraging people from being an entrepreneur. It's really focused on developing yourself as a person, preparing yourself to get into the workforce, and if you think you might want to go the entrepreneurial route, here's a way to go about it organically. And I oftentimes will give stories, and one of the stories I like to tell the most is a friend of mine, Corey, who didn't go to college. He doesn't have a criminal background, but the way that he approached building his own small business was unique. And I actually frankly don't think it's unique at all. I think a lot of small companies start this way. But he waited on tables, and he wanted to start a restoration company. And so 1 or 2 nights a week, he would rent a carpet cleaning machine, and he would clean carpets 1 or 2 nights a week. And then while he was waiting on tables and to keep the cash flow flowing. And then he did that 3 or 4 times a week. And then eventually he found himself where he had enough cash flow to buy a used van that had a carpet cleaning mounted machine in it. And that was about 2 years in. And then he bought that and started cleaning more carpets, and then he started to get some calls for flood remediation projects. And so then he would rent the equipment to take care of the flood remediation. Eventually worked himself out of waitering so he could focus on his business. Now 20 years later, he's in 3 different states. He's got 75, 80 people, whatever. But it didn't happen overnight. He had to grow it organically. And he had to take care of his basic needs first and his family needs first by being a good employee in a job that he didn't like. He didn't want to do that job, but he didn't allow what he was internalizing to come out. He did his waitering job as if it was his favorite job, because he knew that if he did that with a positive, productive attitude, A, he'd be happier, but B, he'd probably get better tips. And it was just going to be short term and temporary. And so I'll give that story often, and I'll say the magic trick there for Corey was the fact that he engaged his mind in long-term planning. And so he lived in the present, but he continued to think about what would life look like down the road if I continued to stay faithful. And for you, many of you, not talking to you necessarily, but talking to the audience as if I'm teaching the class, for many of you, our biggest challenge is getting out of the tyranny of the urgent, that survival mode. For many of us, we've been in this lifestyle coming out of generational poverty or addiction where we're constantly just needing to get the next thing fixed. And we have to recalibrate our brains and to start thinking and preparing in advance, right? And then we'll start and elaborate on that further. Yes, ma'am?
I can just speak really loud if that's okay.
Yeah, fine with me.
So for the people that you hire with sex offenders of any class, I know we're focusing on employment, but a lot of the questions I get in my job relate to housing. So for those of you who have hired, what have been their successes in securing housing and kind of getting over those hurdles given their background?
Yeah, it is a big challenge. Over time, we've been able to develop a network of relationships with landlords in the Columbus community that we trust are good landlords, and they trust us that if we refer somebody to them, they're an individual who is going to be a reliable tenant. Now, there's more guarantee for our staff that they're going to be a good landlord than there is for the landlord that they're necessarily going to get a great tenant. Just being real. And so having said that, we are very careful about who it is that will refer to that network of landlords. So that's been our solution to the challenge. And the landlords that we're networked with don't care what the background, they literally don't, it doesn't matter. We've helped people get housing that have, it doesn't matter. I can't think of any exception. And there's a lot of things that you would think a landlord might say no to. And so now, and then some of the folks, I think of Demetrius, I think of Frank as an example. So Frank just got qualified for financing to actually buy his own place now. So he's been with us for 2 years. He's had steady income. He's managed his money. He's budgeted his money. He's gone through our financial literacy training, and he's gone through the process of getting pre-approved to be able to get his own house. And so we're helping him with that process to make sure that the financing, A, is a good deal, but 2, that he is comfortable about the type of house that he's moving into and the type of neighborhood that he's moving into. And so now there is that challenge for folks when we first meet them to when we're comfortable making that referral. So what do they do for that 6 months or maybe even a year in some cases? And that's for us been the more difficult piece. What we've started to do over the last 2 years is begin our process of working with individuals pre-release. And so our life skills training and entrepreneurship training, et cetera, that we're doing in the prison. We've integrated that into a correspondence program where when we meet individuals in the class, if they write us back a letter, we'll start a relationship via letter, and we'll assign homework and assignments and coaching sessions specific to that individual through a correspondence program. So we start to get to know the individuals via correspondence, and then when we go back to the prison. So we've had situations where individuals within that first week of release, we know them well enough that A, they're hired, and B, we can make a reference for housing. And now the key question is, how do we scale that? Because there's certainly a lot more success for those folks who find housing in a supportive environment and employment in a supportive environment with a new network of friends. That's, for us, that's 100% success rate right now. Like, that model is just, there's nobody that's fallen through the cracks on that specific model. How do we scale it is the big question. Folks that are on transitional control, we haven't seen that same success. Folks that are on transitional control, they exit, they start working with us, they're in what seems to be supportive housing, but for whatever reason, as soon as transitional control is over, within the first week, 90% of the folks that we've hired over the last 6 years, roughly 90%, it's like 86%, within the first week or two.
What's transitional control?
So transitional control is folks that are, they're still technically incarcerated, but they're allowed out to be in a halfway house. Work release. They see a PO. So there's a lot of accountability. It depends, but there's a lot. There's accountability. It's a structured environment. They have to sign out, sign back in when they come. Usually the employer is called to double check to make sure they're actually at work, et cetera, et cetera. But again, as soon as they're out of TC, the mindset hasn't changed. The network of folks hasn't changed. They leave transitional control. They have no place to transition to, so they transition back to where they were from. And literally, I mean, it's not healthy.
Your transitional control, or what we would call halfway houses, do not require an approvals, home plan or anything?
My understanding is that they do require a transition plan, and I oftentimes have seen that transition plan articulated in theory on paper, but the reality versus what is planned are two entirely different things. So,
Because I know our probation parole officers do follow up people and monitor, so we have ways to get back in.
now I will say that, like, I don't know what happens after they disappear. And I will also say there's probably been, just in the last year, a half a dozen folks that have come up to me in prison that were in that situation. So I know where they ended up. They ended up back and from. One fellow just about 3 months ago came up to me and said, Rush, he basically said, Rush, I wish I would have listened, because now I'm facing 4 years. I saw him at the county jail, so he was waiting on a sentence, but he was facing 4 years.
Good question over
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if I really need this or not, but I guess it'll make it easier for me to talk. As an activist-minded person, I would love to support any business that hires or supports registered citizens. And of course, I understand that there's probably that challenge of how to put it out there without, the general public knowing that you support that kind of efforts, because obviously people are like, oh, you hire sex offenders, I won't do business with you then. How do you, do you have any suggestions on how to put it out there? Because I would love to support businesses, but the thing is, I don't know which businesses support our efforts or not.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a very good question. It's a marketing question, and then it's also a risk management question. And so, first, if you're a business that's serving a customer base where it's not necessarily a product-based business where you're sending your product out to the customer, but where you're actually providing a service to the customer, the way in which you manage risk in those two scenarios is going to be a little bit uniquely different. Right, and so because in the service-based company, you have more employee to customer interaction, face-to-face interaction, whereas in a product-based business, the product is what is interacting with your end customer, not necessarily the employee that's putting the product together, right? And so how you manage risk in those two different scenarios is going to be different. So you can you can tell your story in both scenarios, and you should tell the story, especially in the second scenario where there's more face-to-face interaction. Because if you try to hide it and you don't talk about it, and something happens, you will lose. It'll be very difficult. You are liable. I mean, you're in a situation where you literally could be finding yourself without a business anymore, and being able to not create opportunities for anybody because one person decided to do one thing that was dumb, and they did it, and they're a registered offender, and you knew it, but you didn't let your customer know it. Therefore, you're liable, and you're going to have to face the consequences, right? And so, so there's a risk there that has to be managed. Now, that's the risk piece. There's a whole lot more that we could talk about there. From a marketing standpoint, and there's also an operational component. Let me just touch on the operational component. I kind of did a little bit earlier where I mentioned we're selective on who we place on certain jobs based on where those jobs are performed. Operationally, sometimes you do have to be internally, you have to strategically think about how many folks can I hire who have certain types of backgrounds, but based on the positions that I have, where we're working, and our projections about where we're going to be working over the next year, right? Operationally, you just have to be able to make some of those decisions in a healthy way. The same that you might have to make with respect to how many folks can I hire who have a driver's license versus how many I hire who don't have a driver's license. In a company like ours, where we need drivers because of our company vehicles that transport our crews, not everyone needs a driver's license, but when you have a lot of vehicles that are driven by staff, there's a percent. I think our percent right now is 30% of our staff. We need at least 30% of our staff to have a driver's license. I can't remember if that's exact. It's somewhere around 30%. And so operationally, there's things you have to think through as well. But from a marketing standpoint, it's been fascinating because, and again, there's different ways to approach this from a marketing standpoint. I have a good friend, Joe DeLoss, who heads up Hot Chicken Takeover, whose approach is just slightly different than our approach at Clean Turn Enterprises. We have it front and center. Clean Turn Enterprises, our mission statement is focused on, our mission statement is to strengthen communities through an empowered workforce by creating profitable social enterprises. As soon as you dig into that, you realize that we're hiring individuals who've spent time incarcerated, are coming out of challenging backgrounds, generational poverty, trauma, human trafficking, domestic violence, addiction, you name it. Everybody knows that. So if you hire us at any one of our brands, that's what you're hiring, individuals who've been locked up. Now, different people have different language that they use based on where they're at in the journey, right? Returning citizen, ex-con, felon, dog, whatever. I've heard all of them, and so have you. So now there's a segment of the market, and what's your name? Derek. There's a segment of market that's like Derek. I would prefer to do business with a company that hires individuals who have challenging backgrounds because of their mission. Now, Derek, I'm sure if he called up She Has a Name Cleaning Services to clean his house, wants a clean house. So even though we have a great mission, that Derek is like got his pom-poms out and he's like, give me a A, give me a B. He's cheering, he's so excited, right? But if we come and his toilet's still dirty and his shower's still got soap all over it and the dog hair, I don't know if you have a dog or not, the dog's hairs are still laying around, like even though he loves the mission, he's still going to call and say, I love your mission, but there needs to be some improvement. Okay, we got you. We understand. We're sorry, blah, 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 blah. We go out a second time. Derek, he's not done with us yet. We go out a second time. And there's a little bit of improvement, but there's like, I'm paying money to support this organization to clean my house. I love their mission, this is getting tough. You know, even Derek, after a few visits, he's going to be like, maybe not even a few, maybe after 2 or 3, he's going to be like, I love you guys and I love your mission, but he's going to start using somebody else for cleaning, and he might take a little bit of money and donate it to a nonprofit that's working in that space. So yeah. So you have to, from a marketing standpoint, it's great to tell the story, and it's great to realize that there's a segment of the market that's going to want to use you because of your mission. But that doesn't trump nor take precedence over the core competency that you are communicating to the market that you're able to provide. She has an Ames Cleaning's case, a cleaning company that will respond to your needs, right, in a responsive, responsible way. Quality cleaning services. You don't need to hassle or think about cleaning. That's the last thing you need to think about. So that's our focus, right? Yes, we do have a mission, and we're on mission, and you're going to know about our mission, and you'll support our mission by hiring us. But you will get quality cleaning work. And if anything's jacked up, we're going to take care of you right away. Little policies, anything that's broke. We broke a wine glass at an office 2 weeks ago. I get a note on any time anything's broke. It comes to my desk, and I personally write a note to that person and say, I apologize on behalf of our organization that we broke your wine glass, right? You have to set up systems like that to show that you care and love your customers, because we do. They're the ones that are creating the pathways for individuals to move forward in a promising career, right? They're a partner with us, and so we will respect and honor and love them, right? So, yes, ma'am.
I just have a quick question. You said you have a entrepreneurial program for prisons. Where?
Yeah, so we go into the prisons and teach the class, and so
What prisons?
London, Portsmouth, Chillicothe, Marion, ORW, the county jail is different. FMC down in Franklin County. I can't, there's several. There's about 20 of them. And it's just in Ohio, though. Maybe just say that, just Ohio. So, yeah, we have a partnership with the Department of Corrections. I'm actually on their board for I forget what the name of the board is. Oh, shoot. Anyways, I'll blame it on the allergy pill. How's that? But where we help screen companies that want to partner with DRC. Now, we don't get paid by DRC to do that work. But anyways, yeah. So, and if you are in a prison and you're like, I'm not sure you've been in the prison I'm at or been to or visited, let me know, because we'd love to go. Yes, sir.
We have like 3 minutes left.
3 minutes.
Previous time I saw your presentation, you said we're trying to expand outside the closed area. Has that been able to take place yet?
It's not. We are working on creating SOPs for each of the business lines, standard operating procedures, so we can take what we're doing and as mentioned, franchise as mentioned earlier, we'd love to be able to take what we're doing and replicate it in other major urban communities. Part of the big challenge for us in scaling and thinking through scalability is cash flow, and at what point do we want to open up what we're doing to other investors so that cash might be less of a concern issue. We're also in the process of buying the campus that we're currently located at, and so which we've used about 30% of to open up that campus as a social enterprise incubator hub that will allow us to be able to launch other brands. And so launching new brands, creating SOPs for current brands, going through the process of buying a campus and doing our training in the prisons. I would have probably several people that would advise me to pick one thing and focus on that, but that's never going to be the reality. So just not me. So, but yes, eventually, over the next, I would say probably 2 years, 3 years, we should be ready to be in a Cincinnati or Cleveland market. One more question. Standard operating procedures. Mm-hmm. So that's documentation from literally everything from how you do roll call in the morning, how do you put together your staffing plan, everything. How do you clean a floor, how do we, the Shan way. This is top to bottom, left to right. I mean, it's like taking everything that we already have in our training manuals, business development, et cetera, everything we do from recruitment, from in the prisons with community partners that make referrals, our group interview process. It's taking all that stuff and putting it in writing in a nice, robust, I keep saying like, because I feel like it's this much of a manual, but it's probably not that big. But
People can purchase that and create their own.
so the idea would be to be able to take that package and start your own. We'd provide the coaching and the mentoring, and we'd come alongside. So that means also that some of our management team, including myself, have to be able to be freed up to be able to help that become a successful launch, especially the first 3 or 4 where you're managing the brand, right? And so you want those first 3 or 4, you want all of them to go well, but you want especially the first 3 or 4 to go really well. Sorry.
I know that you're in a big urban area and you're looking at other urban areas, and I'm from a town of 26,000 in a rural county in Ohio. And we're just at the beginning of trying to explore what's possible for us as an entrepreneurship style business to hire returning citizens particularly. Do you have any advice for us in that kind of setting, or resources we could turn to, or models in other smaller communities?
That's a great question. And some of you may have a better response to that question. I would begin where I began when I came to Columbus. I knew less than 10 people when I went to Columbus. And Chicago was a lot bigger. My kids thought we were moving to the country when we moved to Columbus. But as you network within that sphere, that geographic area that you have, so if there's 26,000 people, I would network with every business in that community to find out what business are they in, what are they producing, who's buying their product and services, what needs do those businesses have that are not currently being met, and in the region, what businesses exist and what needs do they have, and what product or service could be created within your town that could meet those demands. Find out where there are market needs, work with a local chamber, work with the Ohio Chamber to say, hey, where are the market gaps that we might be able to fill? Because any job training or any business plan that's not focused on where there's a market demand for a service or product is really pie in the sky thinking, right? You have to know that there's somebody that's going to buy that product or service, and the best way to find out is talking to businesses in the area. Our clean turn demolition, I'd never done demolition, and I'll be done in 10 seconds in my life. And I first heard demolition, I'm thinking this big crane with a big ball, and it's like, and I'm like, it sounds fun. Like, give me that thing, dude. I'm like, that would be amazing. But no, it's interior demolition. Imagine this hotel transforming into something else. They want to get rid of the ceiling, the carpet, and the walls, et cetera, et cetera. We'll come in, we'll gut this thing and make it a shell, right? Well, I worked with a contractor. I said, teach me everything you know. Teach me with architectural plan. How do you read it? Blah, blah, blah. I found out that contractors can't find quality demo contractors. I'm like, okay, sweet. I can do that. Like, I can be, my commitment is to be the best demo contractor. I'll be the best one. I'll be reliable, right? And so, but you just talk to the businesses and find out what their needs are, and then focus on one need, interior demolition. Focus on that need. So thank you guys.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.